Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, gentlemen. Great to see two Marines at the table. As the chairman knows, the terms Marine and intelligence are considered synonymous by most, so glad to see you're glad to see you're bolstering that fine tradition. I wanted to focus a little bit on the what's going on in the South China Sea. And Director Clapper, last time you were here, you expressed concerns over the possible militarization of some of the formations that are being built up in that part of the world by the Chinese. And as you know, here we are a year later, and that's exactly happened in terms of 3,200 acres of new land, 7 large land features, an airfield, one of which is 10,000 feet long. What do you believe the Chinese, what do you believe their goals are in the region?
Well, I think the Chinese are very, very determined to sustain their exorbitant claims in the South China Sea. They've had this 9-line claim for some time. They have sustained that. I think they will continue with building up their capabilities on these outcroppings and
do you
islands.
think they're clearly looking to militarize those outcroppings?
Well, I think not sure what the definition of militarize is. Apparently, President Xi may have a different definition than we do. But I think when you put in runways and hangars and start installing radars, doing port calls with the Chinese Navy and Chinese Coast Guard ships. They have not yet, I don't believe, actually landed any military fighter aircraft yet, but they have tested the airworthiness, so to speak, of their aerodromes there with civilian aircraft. So I think it's very clear that they will try to exert as much possessiveness, if you will, over this area and the South China Sea in general.
I want to follow up on a point the chairman just made. As far as our policy to counter that, this committee, in a bipartisan way, has certainly been encouraging the White House, the military, to conduct regular fawn ops in the region, preferably with our allies. I think our allies are all very motivated to see American leadership here. Do you think that we have clearly articulated what our policy is, and do you think that regular fawn ops by U.S. military vehicles, ships, aircraft with our allies is an important way to counteract a strategy that seems to have very little pushback on it right now?
Well, again, this is policy, and we're just down the engine room shoveling intelligence coal, but I do think that we have made clear the policy on freedom of navigation and have done at least 2 fawn-up missions.
Do you think our allies understand what our articulated policy in the region is?
I think they do, and I think they welcome our freedom of navigation operations. I think they are a bit reticent to speak publicly as supportively as they do in private.
Let me turn to the Arctic. I appreciated both of your focus on the Arctic in your testimony. And as you know, there's been a dramatic increase in the Russians' military buildup in the Arctic. There's been statements by the Deputy Prime Minister about how we should colonize the Arctic. You even mentioned, Director, in your testimony that the Russians would be prepared to act unilaterally to protect their interests in the Arctic. Let me just ask a couple of questions, and both of you can answer them to however you want in terms of prioritization. What do you believe the Russians are up to with their dramatic buildup in the Arctic? President Putin certainly is somebody who probes for weakness. How do you think he's reacting to our actual plans for dramatically withdrawing the only Arctic-trained forces in the active duty U.S. military? And do we need to be looking at kind of fawn-op kind of operations in the Arctic, particularly given that the Russians have such a significant interest in the Arctic. They've built up their northern fleet. They have 40 icebreakers. And the strategic Northwest Passage is only going to become more important. Is that something we should be looking at doing on a regular basis in terms of our FONOPs? So you can answer any of those, all three of those questions if you'd like.
I can comment on, from an intelligence perspective, that we are turning attention to the Arctic. There's about a 6,000-kilometer-long coastline that the Russians have on the Arctic. They've established built around their northern fleet, a joint command to oversee their military activities. They're refurbishing bases there. Quantitatively, they appear to have where they're going would be actually less than what they had in the Arctic regions during the heyday of the Cold War, but qualitatively, it'll probably be better. What has stymied the Russians, as I alluded to earlier, though, was their grand plans for investing there, particularly with energy extraction, have been stymied because of the economic recession. So, and they need foreign investment from a technological standpoint, and they are not getting it because of the economic extremis they're in. So yes, the Arctic is important. We engage with the countries that are a part of the Arctic Council, notably Canada and Norway. We're stepping up our intelligence sharing with those countries in terms of what the Russians are doing there. As far as what we do about it and troop deployments, that's kind of not our department.
But you can give us assessment on what you believe Putin would think as he builds up the Arctic. We're withdrawing forces from the Arctic. In your assessment of how he operates and thinks, what does he think about that? How will he view a reduction in Arctic forces by the United States when he is dramatically building up forces? You can certainly answer that question.
I don't know what he thinks. I don't read his mind, but I guess anytime he sees an opportunity where he believes we're reducing or not being prevalent, then if that serves his purpose, he'll take advantage of it.
General, any views?
The Russians intend to increase their ability to control the Arctic regions. They've built air bases. They're building missile defense capability, both coastal and naval missile defense capability. They're doing that for economic and military reasons. In the absence of something that counters that, they will continue to expand. So there is, I think, an imperative that we have both the willingness and the capacity to push back on their control or dominance of the Arctic region. I think they're probably in a place where they'd be willing to negotiate and discuss how you conduct operations in the Arctic, but they need to have something to push against.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator King feels